I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted. Isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Laura died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost story book I found at a thrift store, some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1800s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp. A few rusted-out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people, no distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances, most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows. It was all nonsense. Laura would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything. Not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless, but I wasn't Laura. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The light steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old, things broke, but the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement, something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. The night was still, too still, the kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved, just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it, faint, like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered. "It's just the wind." I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them. Handprints. Long streaks of dust trailing down the windows, as if someone or something had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here. At least no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table, staring at the window, waiting. But nothing happened. The next morning, the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump, nothing. I checked the battery, it was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong, but everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange, deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large. Too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there, in the dirt, were more of those strange marks, long, deep gouges, like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine. Just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around. Nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight. A loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hands shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it. A dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting, but it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted. The fog was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. I had been driving for hours, the Damin Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed, a break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it, a faint sound, almost too soft to notice, a rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted, though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky, when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft, rhythmic pulse, like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night. But every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, like faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey!" I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here. Something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head. Starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. Once you hear it, it doesn't stop. That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me toward something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out, as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A structure, half buried in the sand. A bunker or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing off the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center stood an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. The walls were covered in symbols, strange, intricate markings carved deep into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging toward the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They spoke of the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it grew louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, morphing into a high-pitched screech that stabbed through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal. It was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. Stumbling out of the bunker, the noise still ringing in my ears, I gasped for breath. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spiraling. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping had settled into a constant dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still there, faint but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse at the edge of my consciousness, always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. Lo echoing through the metal walls, echoing off the metal walls, Tuknien Hun Trong Kanam Thang, stood a radio tower. Stood an old radio tower. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the scent of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest were holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One local swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey, everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. Before long, I found the first strange marker, A stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't resemble any language I knew. I filmed it, speaking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter, and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon, it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply vanished. One moment there had been a clear path. Now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, alone, in the fog. "Okay," I muttered. "You've dealt with worse." I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. A slow unease crept over me. Sualoyan kaithir, the smell of wet earth, the scent of wet earth. Go troi chai hern, dutnien hern. As if the forest was holding its breath. As if the forest were holding its breath. Go chuk jadik dungu fap hern. One locals swore disappeared. One locals swore would disappear. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate steps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. There was something off about him. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and his gaze distant, like he wasn't entirely present. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail. It moves. I've seen it. Watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path. It's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like what he was saying. "Look, I have a GPS," I said, pulling it out. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. A clear path one moment would be swallowed by brambles the next. When I looked back, the trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up there was nothing. Just thick, twisted trees that looked like they had been there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then the whispers started, faint at first like wind rustling through the leaves, but soon distinct. Voices calling out from the mist. "Nate!" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." The forest. I tried to shake it off. convinced myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, VOL.2 like someone had packed it yesterday. A chill ran down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog pulsed with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera flickered, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures slipping through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange shifting forest, but the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal, the mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he had never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me. And I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. I wasn't running away from my problems. I was just trying to get some space. At least that's what I told myself after the divorce. Everything felt too close, too suffocating. The paperwork, the empty house, the awkward conversations with friends who didn't know how to bring it up. I needed to get away, and what better way than a solo trip into the wilderness? Dead Man's Creek sounded like the perfect place to clear my head. A name so bleak it made the reality of my situation seem trivial. Just me, my dog Max, and the open road. I'd driven the RV deep into Wyoming's Wind River Range, far from the trails and tourists. That's what I wanted, solitude. I found a spot off the grid, well away from the beaten path. The closest human was probably miles away, which suited me just fine. I set up camp near a bend in the creek, the water dark and slow, reflecting the towering pines above. The quiet was absolute, and I felt something like relief as I stood there, staring out at the wilderness, Max sniffing the ground beside me. "This is it, boy," I said, running my hand through his thick fur. "Just us, no distractions." Max wagged his tail, but his ears were perked, listening to the subtle sounds of the forest. The place was still, too still, but that's what I wanted, wasn't it? Peace, quiet. No one to tell me what I'd done wrong or how I'd lost everything, just the wide open woods and the whisper of the creek. The first night was fine, quiet, uneventful. I cooked a simple meal over the campfire, Max stretched out at my feet. The stars were sharp and cold in the sky, and for the first time in months I felt something close to peace. But that peace didn't last. The second night I noticed it, the silence. Not the calming, tranquil kind, but a deeper, unnatural stillness. No rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, no movement in the trees, just the crackling of the fire and the low, constant murmur of the creek. Max, who usually dozed off by now, was alert, staring into the dark, his ears flat against his head. "What is it, boy?" I asked, standing up and scanning the tree line. Nothing but shadows stretching between the pines. Still, Max didn't relax. His body was stiff, and every few seconds he let out a low growl, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. I grabbed the flashlight from the RV and shone it toward the woods, sweeping the beam across the darkness. Just trees, no glowing eyes, no movement. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and forced myself to relax. Probably just a deer or something. But Max didn't relax. He growled again, deeper this time. His fur bristled. The flashlight flickered. A cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a faint smell. Something rotten, like decayed meat left out in the sun. I wrinkled my nose, holding my breath for a moment. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that the wilderness was full of strange smells, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I tossed another log onto the fire. The flames flared up with a loud crack. For a moment, the smell faded and the wind died down. Max settled a little but stayed close to me, never taking his eyes off the woods. Later that night, as I lay in bed in the RV, I heard it. Soft at first, like a distant whisper. Crying. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound drifted through the trees, carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a woman crying. My first thought was that someone might be out there, lost in the woods, but no one else should have been anywhere near this area. I hadn't seen a single car, a single hiker, nothing. "Help me." The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the murmur of the creek, but it was there, clear as day. Max growled again, this time from his spot at the foot of the bed. He was staring at the door now, his body tense, ears flat. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and crept toward the door. My heart pounded in my chest. Every instinct told me to stay inside, to lock the door and ignore whatever was out there. But that voice, it was so desperate. Slowly, I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The flashlight flickered to life, the beam cutting through the darkness. The crying had stopped. The forest was still again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud, too human for this unnatural quiet. "Is anyone there?" No answer. Just the sound of the creek and the rustling of the trees. Max stayed at my side, his growl low and steady. Then I saw them, footprints. Large, old-fashioned boot prints in the damp soil near the creek's edge. They weren't mine, and they certainly weren't recent. The edges of the prints were weathered, as if they'd been there for weeks. But that was impossible. I backed up, my pulse racing, pulling Max with me. I didn't sleep much that night, the echo of the crying woman replaying in my head. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was all in my mind. Too many nights alone in the wilderness, maybe a little too much whiskey by the fire. But something gnawed at me. Those boot prints, the voice, the smell of rot. Something was wrong here. I needed answers. I spent the afternoon hiking deeper into the woods, staying close to the creek. That's when I found it. An old campsite, or what was left of one. A broken-down wagon, rusted tools scattered in the dirt, and a few rotting planks of wood that might have once been part of a shelter. As I looked closer, I spotted something half buried in the dirt, a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Carefully I opened it, flipping through the delicate pages. The writing was faded, but I could make out enough. It belonged to a woman, a pioneer, by the sound of it, who had traveled west with her family. They had camped near Dead Man's Creek, just like I had. Her early entries were brief, describing their journey and the hardships they faced, but the later ones grew darker, more frantic. The cold is setting in. We lost Joseph last night. He wandered too far from the fire, and we couldn't find him. I hear him sometimes calling out to me from the trees, but when I go to him, he's not there. My children, they're gone too, taken by the woods, by the creek. I can't leave. I have to find them. I have to. The final entry trailed off. The ink smudged as if the writer had been interrupted. My stomach twisted, a chill crawling down my spine. I knew the legend of the crying woman, the one who had lost her family in these woods and now wandered them, searching for her lost loved ones. I'd heard it mentioned in passing by locals when I'd asked for directions to the creek, but I'd brushed it off as folklore. But now I wasn't so sure. That night the crying returned, but this time it was closer, louder. The weeping echoed through the trees, wrapping around the RV like a thick fog. "Help me, please!" Max growled, his hackles raised as he paced near the door. I sat at the table, gripping the edge with white knuckles, my heart pounding. The woman was out there, and she knew I was here. The RV began to shake, the windows rattling as if something or someone was moving around outside. I grabbed the flashlight and stood up, my pulse pounding in my ears. I couldn't stay inside forever. I opened the door. The flashlight beam cut through the dark. The crying stopped, but the air was thick with tension. The rotten smell was back, stronger this time, like it was coming from just a few feet away. And then I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, her figure barely visible in the flickering light of the campfire. Her skin was pale, her clothes torn and stained with dirt. Her hair hung in tangled strands over her face, and when she looked up at me, her eyes, dark, hollow, and wet with tears, seemed to stare right through me. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and broken. "Help me find them." I couldn't move. My feet were frozen to the ground as the woman took a step toward me. The air around her was cold, so cold that it felt like it was freezing the breath in my lungs. Max barked, snapping me out of my paralysis. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. "You're not real. You can't be real." But she was, and she wasn't leaving. "Please," she begged, reaching out a skeletal hand. "My children." The temperature dropped even further as she drew closer. Then, I thought of the journal, the one I had found by the creek, the story of her lost family, her desperation. She was still searching for them, even in death. And if I didn't do something, she would never stop. I grabbed the journal from the RV and ran toward the creek. The crying woman followed, her wails growing louder, more desperate. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached the water's edge, holding the journal in my shaking hands. "Your family's gone," I said, my voice trembling. "They're gone. You need to rest." She stopped, standing at the edge of the creek, her dark eyes locked onto the journal I placed on the ground, like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. For a moment the weeping faded and the wind died down. The crying woman stared at the journal, then at me. Her eyes softened, just for a second, before she vanished. I left Dead Man's Creek the next morning, the journal still lying by the water where I had placed it. As I drove away, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. Max sat beside me, his head resting on my lap, finally calm. I'll never forget the sound of the weeping or the hollow eyes of the crying woman. She's still out there somewhere, searching for something she'll never find. And I'll never return to those woods. Not again. I came to the Pine Barrens for peace, solitude. I thought that getting away from everything would help, that losing myself in the wilderness would somehow fix what was broken inside me after my wife, Sarah, passed. Nothing made sense anymore. My work as a photographer felt pointless. The things I used to care about were gone. Grief had hollowed me out, leaving only a shell of the person I used to be. So, when the offer came to photograph the Barrens for a travel magazine, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my RV, grabbed my camera, and hit the road. The Pine Barrens had always intrigued me with their dense forests and twisted folklore, but I wasn't here for ghost stories. I was here to work, to focus on something other than my own loss, or at least that's what I told myself. It was the second night when I first saw them, the lights. I had spent the day photographing the eerie, quiet beauty of the Barrens, the way the pines stretched up toward the sky like skeletal fingers, the sandy trails winding through dense underbrush. By the time I returned to my RV, the sky was already dark, stars barely visible through the thick canopy above. It was the kind of stillness I had been craving, the perfect backdrop for my long-exposure night shots. I set up my camera, aiming toward the trees, capturing the stillness of the forest beneath the stars. As I clicked through the shots, I noticed something strange in the frames. Small, glowing orbs in the distance. At first I assumed they were fireflies or maybe even distant lanterns. But these lights were too bright, too concentrated. They hovered just beyond the tree line, flickering in and out of focus, as if dancing in the air. I looked up from the camera, squinting into the dark. Nothing. The lights were gone. I frowned, checking the screen again. There they were, clear as day, pale, round orbs glowing softly in the distance, just out of reach. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself it was a trick of the camera, some glitch or reflection I couldn't quite explain. The rational part of my mind dismissed it, but something else, a quiet, nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, told me something wasn't right. I didn't sleep well that night. Even inside the RV, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still out there, watching. The next morning, I pushed the strange encounter aside and decided to venture deeper into the forest. The Barrens were an endless maze of pine trees and narrow, winding trails, and I wanted to capture the desolation, the beauty of the place. I slung my camera over my shoulder and set off, keeping an eye on my GPS to make sure I didn't get lost. The deeper I went, the more unsettling the forest became. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches twisting like gnarled hands. The air was thick and heavy, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural. There were no birds, no rustling of leaves, just silence. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. I was here to work, not to get spooked by old legends. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My compass, which had been working fine all morning, suddenly started spinning erratically. The needle swung wildly in every direction. My phone lost signal, the GPS cutting out entirely. I stopped, staring down at the malfunctioning devices in my hands. I was good with directions, had spent years hiking and camping in places far more remote than this. But now, standing in the heart of the Barrens, I couldn't tell which way I'd come from, and the trees all looked the same. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint whisper. It was so soft I wasn't sure I'd even heard it at first. Just the wind, I told myself, trying to shake off the creeping anxiety. I started to walk back toward the RV, retracing my steps as best I could. That's when I heard it again, whispers, like distant voices carried on the breeze. Back at camp, I felt the full weight of isolation pressing down on me. The whispers from earlier hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown louder, clearer. As the day turned into night, I told myself it was nothing, that I was just on edge from being alone out here. But as darkness fell, and the oppressive stillness of the forest closed in, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. I decided to review the photos I'd taken that day, hoping the distraction would calm my nerves. As I scrolled through the images, something caught my eye. The lights. There they were again, hovering just at the edge of the frame, bright and unmistakable. They flickered in the distance, glowing softly against the dark backdrop of the trees. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but the closer I looked, the more the light seemed to blur, as if they were shifting, moving in some unnatural way. I glanced up from the screen, and my heart stopped. The lights weren't just in the photos, they were outside. I rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain, and there, just beyond the trees, I saw them. Pale, glowing orbs floating silently in the darkness. They pulsed gently, like they were beckoning me, drawing me in. I felt a strange pull, an almost physical urge to step outside, to follow the lights into the woods. I told myself it was ridiculous, that I was being irrational, but the more I stared, the stronger the pull became. Before I knew it, I was grabbing my camera and heading for the door. The forest was darker than it should have been. The thick canopy blocked out any trace of moonlight. The lights moved ahead of me, hovering just out of reach, flickering in and out of sight as they led me deeper into the trees. I kept telling myself that I was only following them to figure out what they were, to get the perfect shot for my blog. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. There was something else drawing me forward, something I couldn't explain. The deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to close in around me, twisting and warping, their shapes blurred in the darkness. My footsteps felt heavy, sluggish, like the ground was pulling at me, slowing me down. The lights, however, remained just out of reach, always moving a little farther ahead, urging me to follow. And then I heard it. Sarah's voice. "Nate?" I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. "Nate, come back to me." It was her. It had to be. The voice was so soft, so familiar, like the way she used to call me from the other room when she needed help with something. I stood there, frozen, staring at the lights as they pulsed gently, the sound of her voice swirling around me. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she was out there, waiting for me, that somehow she wasn't gone. But something about the voice wasn't right. It was too distant, too hollow, like an echo from a place I couldn't reach. The lights flickered, growing brighter, and I felt the pull again, stronger this time, almost overwhelming. My mind screamed at me to move, to follow, to find her. But something deep in my gut told me not to. "No," I whispered, backing away, shaking my head. "This isn't real." I turned to run, but the forest had changed. The once familiar path was gone, replaced by an endless tangle of trees, all twisted and gnarled like something out of a nightmare. The lights flared angrily, swirling around me. Now their once soft glow became harsh and blinding. I stumbled, panic rising in my chest as the ground beneath me seemed to shift, pulling me down. The air grew thick and suffocating. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. "Give in. Come with us." I ran blindly through the trees, the lights chasing me, flickering like angry fireflies. The whispers grew louder, their voices overlapping, creating a cacophony of sound that made it impossible to think. I wasn't sure how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp, just like the forest around me. But eventually I spotted a familiar shape in the distance, the RV. I burst through the trees, collapsing against the side of the RV, gasping for breath. The lights hovered at the edge of the clearing, pulsing angrily, but they didn't follow. I scrambled inside, slamming the door behind me. The lights remained outside, flickering ominously, but they didn't come closer. It was as if something was keeping them at bay, something stronger than whatever force had been pulling me toward them. I slumped to the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion, my mind still reeling from the experience. The whispers had stopped, but the memory of them lingered, echoing in the back of my mind. I had nearly followed them, nearly given in. But whatever those lights were, they weren't Sarah. They never had been. As dawn broke, I didn't wait around to see if the lights would return. I packed up the RV and left the Pine Barrens behind, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights were still out there, waiting for the next traveler to lose their way. The beckoning lights hadn't gotten me, not this time. but I knew they wouldn't stop. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there in the fog. My name's Jack Evans, Slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 15 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver, recovering lost cargo off the coast. But the sea and I had fallen out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job, no questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well, but now my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. "Jack!" The voice was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. "Jack, help me!" I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is this?" No answer, just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again. This time, clearer, like the static was peeling away. "Jack, why didn't you come back?" I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner, the guy who drowned 6 years ago in that accident. The accident I'd been running from ever since. "Get a grip, Slick," I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog, it was all getting to me. That's what it had to be. Just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life. Another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights, blinking faintly just off the edge of the road, where the cliffs dropped down to the sea. At first, I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog. But these lights weren't moving. They hovered low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container, it was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, The fog, the voice on the radio. It all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. "Jack!" The voice hit me again, this time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stop it!" I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. "You're not real!" But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the sea, an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. "You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown." The memories hit hard and fast. The dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea, and now here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed, and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo. It was something alive, something old. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the cab, but I could still hear the echoes in my head. Dave's voice, the whispers from the mist, the rhythmic pulse of that artifact. I tightened my grip on the wheel, trying to shake the feeling crawling up my spine. I should have ditched the cargo. I should have turned back, reported it, done anything but drive forward with that thing still locked in my trailer. But something told me it wouldn't have mattered. The road stretched ahead, empty except for the first hints of morning light bleeding into the sky. I needed to get to the shipyard, drop the container, and never look back. That was the plan. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. An hour passed, then another. The farther I got from the coast, the more the tension in my chest eased, until I saw the sign. Bar Harbor, 12 miles. I exhaled, telling myself I was almost there. Just one more stretch of highway. But then, my headlights flickered, the dashboard lights dimmed, and the hum from the trailer started again, faint at first, then stronger. The road signs blurred, the air thickening like the fog was trying to claw its way inland. My hands were slick with sweat, and that cold knot in my gut twisted tighter. Then the CB radio crackled to life again. "Jack!" I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Jack, you can't outrun it." The voice was different this time. Not just Dave. It was layered, distorted, like a chorus of voices speaking in unison. I reached for the radio, hesitating before pressing the button. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Static hissed through the speaker. Then, just one word: return. The truck lurched violently, like something had grabbed the trailer and yanked it back. The wheel jerked in my hands, and I fought to keep control as the rig skidded across the asphalt. I slammed the brakes, tires screaming, my heart hammering against my ribs, and then silence. The truck had stopped in the middle of the highway. The fog was back, creeping in from all sides, and standing just ahead, illuminated in my headlights, was a figure. Not a ghost this time. A man. Dressed in a long, tattered coat, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't move. He just stood there, waiting. The hum from the trailer grew unbearable, a deep, resonating pulse that made my teeth ache. I had a choice. I could floor it, barrel past him and pretend none of this was happening. Or I could get out and see what was waiting for me. I already knew what I was going to do. Taking a deep breath, I shut off the engine, grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the road. The figure didn't move, but the moment my boots hit the pavement, the hum stopped. And the man finally spoke. "You've brought it too far, Jack." His voice was gravel and salt, like an old fisherman who had spent a lifetime speaking to the waves. I tightened my jaw. "Who the hell are you?" He lifted his head just enough for me to see his eyes, dark, endless, filled with the weight of something ancient. "A warning," he said, "before it's too late." The wind howled through the trees, and behind me, from inside the locked trailer, something knocked. Once. Twice. Then silence. I turned back to the man, but he was already gone. And in the distance, just beyond the highway, I swore I heard the sea calling my name. The road wound through the dense trees, snaking deeper into the heart of low national forest. The thick canopy above allowed only sparse sunlight to filter through, casting shifting shadows across the narrow dirt path. I gripped the steering wheel of my RV, trying to shake off the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. It had been 3 hours since I'd passed another vehicle. Solitude was the whole point, wasn't it? This trip was supposed to help me clear my head, to reconnect with myself after the divorce. I had spent the last few months in a fog, and this journey to Deadwood Creek was meant to be my escape, a test of independence. No ex-husband, no stress, just me in the wilderness. I needed this. At least, that's what I had been telling myself for the past 2 weeks. Deadwood Creek Campground wasn't listed on any mainstream maps, just a blip on an obscure site for hardcore campers seeking isolation. The campground had a reputation, but that was part of the appeal. I needed the quiet, far from anything that reminded me of what I'd left behind. But as I pulled into the clearing, past a moss-covered sign that read Deadwood Creek, a shiver ran through me. The place was eerily silent, the kind of stillness that makes you second-guess your decision to be alone. I parked the RV near a small, trickling creek. The only other vehicle was an old beat-up camper a short distance away, nestled under the towering pines. It was empty, no sign of movement, no campfire. Good. I wasn't in the mood for socializing. Stepping out into the cool afternoon air, I surveyed the site. The woods were thick, ancient. The ground was blanketed in pine needles, muffling the sound of my footsteps, a perfect retreat. I set up camp, unfolding my chair and setting my mug of tea beside me as I sat by the creek, listening to the soft gurgle of the water. It was peaceful, just as I'd hoped. But after a while, the peace felt off, too still. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was oppressive. My mind wandered back to the stories I'd read online, the rumors about Deadwood Creek's dark history. This used to be a mining settlement during the gold rush, or so the tale went. Dozens of men came seeking fortune, but most found only death, mysterious disappearances, bodies never recovered. Some say the men still haunt the place, bound to the land, working their endless shifts beneath the earth. I had dismissed it at first, chalking it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. But now, sitting alone in the fading light, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The wind rustled the trees, and I jumped at the sound. Get it together, Hannah, I thought, rolling my eyes at my own nerves. I hadn't come all this way just to scare myself into leaving. That's when I saw him, a man standing near the edge of the campground, just at the tree line, leaning against a tree. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scruffy beard. His clothes were worn and dirty, as if he had been out here for weeks. His gaze was fixed on me. I waved awkwardly. He lifted a hand in response. Then, slowly, he started walking toward me. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said, his voice easy, almost too casual. "Didn't expect anyone else out here this late in the season." "I wasn't expecting anyone either," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some time alone, you know." "Yeah, I get that," he chuckled, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Rick, by the way. Been coming here for years." I nodded, unsure of what to say. Rick had the look of someone who belonged out here, someone who knew the woods like the back of his hand. I didn't. "Be careful out here," Rick said after a pause, his gaze drifting toward the woods. "Deadwood Creek's got a history. Strange things happen when the sun goes down." My skin prickled at his words, but I forced myself to laugh. "Let me guess. Ghost stories?" "Miners and all that?" Rick's expression didn't change. "Something like that. Just don't stray too far from your camp." Without another word, he turned and walked back to his camper, leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV was quiet, the temperature inside dropping faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in blankets, trying to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Then the sound started. At first I thought it was the wind, but soon I realized it was more than that. Faint at first, barely perceptible. A rhythmic clinking echoed from the direction of the creek. It sounded like tools, mining tools, pickaxes striking rock. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. No, I was just imagining it. This was what I came here for, solitude. But I couldn't shake the sound. It was getting louder, the metallic rhythm persistent, almost like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed out of the RV, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was a wall of darkness, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The sound of the creek was louder now, rushing over rocks, and I could swear I heard voices, whispers carried on the wind. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, catching nothing but trees and the faint shimmer of water. But then I saw them, figures, shadowy, half-formed shapes moving by the creek. Their outlines were faint but unmistakably human. They moved as if they were working, digging, swinging pickaxes in time with the clinking sound. My throat tightened as I realized they weren't there in the normal sense. They were translucent, faded. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Ghosts? No, that was impossible. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing. But as I turned, I nearly collided with Rick. "Easy," he said, raising his hands. "I saw your light. Thought I'd come check on you." I couldn't find the words to explain what I'd just seen, but Rick didn't need me to. He just looked over at the creek and nodded, his face unreadable. "They come out at night. The miners. Been here for over a century, trapped in their own hell." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic. "You mean you know about this? What is this place?" Rick gave a half smile, though it was more sad than comforting. Deadwood Creek. These men came here to find gold, but all they found was death. Now they're stuck here, working the land forever. Some nights they're just echoes, other nights. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. On other nights, they weren't just echoes.